You're welcome to our financial markets course. So, under Unit 3, we are considering Section 6, which is monetary policy. So, still under stock market and the central bank, we want to look at monetary policy, what it entails, what it is. So, by the end of this session, you should be able to explain the meaning of monetary policy as well as discuss the various monetary policy tools that has been used. So the history of monetary policy management in Ghana can be categorized into two main distinct phases. That is the period associated with monetary controls and the period under which monetary policy has been allowed to develop in a setting of a liberalized environment. So the direct control system of monetary management had to be abandoned with the advent liberalization of the economy in 1983. So the liberalization process entailed progressive deregulatory measures which led to the institutionalization of a market-based system of monetary management in early 1992, and the focus was largely on the use of indirect and market-based instruments in the conduct of the monetary policy. So this brought into focus a new dimension and a way for monetary management, and it was designed and implemented. So by 2002, the Bank of Ghana Act 612 was passed by Parliament, and this gave way for the Bank of Ghana to be independent and to be able to discharge of its monetary policy. So the independent aspect of the law implied that the bank could use whatever tools available at its disposal in achieving its primary objective of price stability. So as we've said in our previous sessions, the main or one of the key issues of the Bank of Ghana is the issue of price stability. So the monetary policy framework was developed to ensure price stability, which is backed by the Banks Act 612 in 2002. So far we have had vague interest on what determines money supply, but we just assume that it's partly determined by the central bank and partly by non-policy shocks. But there are four main actors whose role are key in determining the money supply. So the key actor is the central bank, and we have commercial banks, depositors, and borrowers. And amongst all four players, as I've already stated, the central bank is the most important player, because the central banks dictate to all these players in the financial market. It's the central bank that determines what the commercial banks should charge on deposits, and this reflects to what borrowers are supposed to pay in terms of interest. So we now want to look at some of the instruments used by the central bank to control money supply. So the first instrument we want to look at is the open market operation, and it's commonly known as OMO. So through the open market operation, the bank buys and sells debt securities in the market to influence liquidity conditions. So the central bank allows commercial banks to deposit short-term funds with them. And then since interest rates offered on this facility varies, the deposit facility can also use the policy instruments to influence the amount of interest that will be charged to their borrowers. So based on the amount of interest that central banks charge commercial banks on the deposit that is made, the commercial banks reflect on that and are guided by this principle to charge either a small amount of interest on the loans that they give out to their borrowers. So when the central bank buys government securities, it increases the amount of currency. Also, for a given demand for money, it leads to a lower interest rate. So depending on what the central bank wants to do, either to increase the interest rate in the economy or to reduce the interest rates, the open market operation is used as a way to regulate commercial banks, and this ultimately affects depositors and the borrowers in the financial markets operation. Also, we want to look at the repurchase agreement. So under the repurchase agreement, we are saying that its objective is to enable the Bank of Ghana to fine-tune the level of reserves that are sent out. So under this agreement, the Bank of Ghana buys treasury bills from the banks, and the banks are contractually obligated to buy the bills back within a very short time, typically 1 day, sometimes 2 or 3. And the interest rate on these repurchase agreements is usually a 0.5 or 0.7%, and this is what the commercial banks use to determine the interest that should be charged on their 91-day treasury bills and the other short-term agreements. We also want to look at the foreign exchange operations. So with the foreign exchange operations, we are saying that the sale of foreign exchange has often been used by the central banks to mop up liquidity when other instruments fail. So given the uncertainties about the success of the open market operations, the temporal nature of the repurchase agreements, and the difficulty in using some of the required instruments, the foreign exchange operation has been one of the Bank of Ghana's main instruments or main monetary policy tool to control the inflow and the outflow of money in the economy. So here we are saying that the sale of a foreign exchange has the same effect on reserve money as an open market sale of government security. So individuals and companies pay for foreign exchange by drawing down their Ghana cedi deposits at the banks or reducing their Ghana cedi holdings, and this reflects by either reducing or increasing the amount of circulation in the economy. Also, we want to consider the reserve requirements. So with the reserve requirements, we are talking about the amount that commercial banks are supposed to hold with the central bank. So with this amount, they are not required to touch it at all. So the central banks presumes that there may be times within their operations that the banks may not be able to meet their clients' needs. So in the worst case scenario, the central bank falls on the monies that are being kept by the banks with them to help them meet their solvency problems. So here we are saying that if the reserve requirements or the amounts they are supposed to keep with the central banks are very high, it means that a high interest rate will be charged on the loans that are given out to borrowers, and it means that also lenders will enjoy a very small amount of interest. So based on what the central bank seeks to achieve in terms of the amount of money circulating in the economy, it either increases the interest rate or reduces the interest rate. We also have the discount policy. So the discount policy says that if central banks want to increase the amount of money in circulation, a lot of reduction will be done on the discounts that are given to commercial banks, just so that the money in circulation will be reduced. But to increase the amount of money in circulation, the central banks will reduce their discount policies or encourage a lot of discount policy offers, so that the central banks will be able to pass it on to their borrowers and lenders, so that they also enjoy a lot of money in circulation. Also, we can look at lastly the interest rate. So depending on the interest rate that the central banks charge commercial banks. So here I want to make it clear that one of the main benefits of the central banks to commercial banks is that the central bank serves as a lender of a last resort to commercial banks. So the commercial banks are allowed to borrow from the central banks. So if the interest that the central banks are charging are very high, it means that it will translate to the need of the borrowers, or the borrowers will have to carry that burden in the end. So depending on how the central banks wants to control the amount of circulation of money, it either increases or reduces the interest rates charged on loans that are given to commercial. All too soon, we've come to the end of this session. In this session, we've discussed monetary policies, the history of monetary policies, as well as some of the instruments that the central banks use to control the circulation of money. So we've seen the open market operation, we've learned interest rates, we've learned about the reserve requirements, the repurchase agreements, and we've seen that all these things are key factors to control money circulation. Thank you for your attention, and see you in our next session. Bye.